Chicago, 1784 to 1848. In the late 1780s, Jean-Baptiste Point-du-Sable became the first person to settle in Chicago. He built his modest house, which included a mill, bakehouse, and a barn just north of the Chicago River. Given that he had the means by which to become successful, Du Sable ran a trading post for both travelers and Native Americans, particularly the Potawatomi, the native tribe of his wife Catherine. Du Sable successfully maintained a peaceful relationship between the natives, himself, and his family. Though today we don't have an accurate picture of what Du Sable looked like, the man who we can thank as the first settler of Chicago probably looked something like this. In 1795, Chief Tecumseh, a Shawnee, refused to attend the Greenville Conference, where he almost surely would have been forced to sign away Native American land. Tecumseh dreamed of a pan-Indian world in which Native Americans would unite beyond their current local ties and drive out the white invaders. When Fort Dearborn soldiers left to protect Detroit after the American invasion into Canada in 1811 did not turn out well, Tecumseh called local tribes to destroy Fort Dearborn. Shortly later, in 1812, Native Americans ambushed 94 Army regulars, militia, and civilians on their way to Fort Wayne. The reestablishment of Fort Dearborn in 1816 and Tecumseh's death ultimately put to end his dream of a pan-Indian nation. Thanks to the 1795 Treaty of Greenville, the settlers had acquired more land to which they could use for settlements. At the mouth of the Chicago River, Captain John Whistler established Fort Dearborn in 1803, named after Thomas Jefferson's secretary, Henry Dearborn. The area soon became an attraction for traders and settlers from Europe, Canada, and the East Coast. The establishment of Fort Dearborn was the gateway for settlers to come to the area. By 1836, so many of the people that had already lived in Fort Dearborn had raved enough to family and friends that there was a massive movement westward to Chicago, which would eventually lead it to becoming a city. John Quincy, known as the father of Chicago, arrived in 1804. During the War of 1812, he switched from the British side to the American side. He became very involved in the trade and politics, and also made many appearances throughout the events that shaped Chicago's early history. The American invasion into Canada on July 12, 1812, turned out to be disastrous. The British took over Mackinac and threatened Detroit and the West. Captain Harold, in charge of Fort Dearborn, asked the Native American chiefs to attend a special council at Piqua. Altogether, 17 chiefs attended from the Potawatomi, Ottawa, Chippewa, and Winnebago tribes. All awaited the outcome of the American invasion into Canada. In 1828, about 3,000 Native Americans agreed to give up 5 million acres of their land in Michigan and their right-of-way from Detroit to Fort Wayne. The government repaid them with $6,000 annually. Every fall, traders came to take advantage of the Native Americans gathering for their payment. 5 years later, the final Indian conclave met in Chicago. 6,000 Native Americans attended and were forced to sign treaties agreeing to leave within 3 years. The hybrid culture faded away. With the Native Americans signing over so much of their land to the Union, Fort Dearborn was abandoned on October 1823 as it was not considered needed. When it was not being used for defense, settlers and explorers used the fort as a base camp. The fort was once again brought back to defense as the Black Hawk War erupted. Settlers that came to the area brought with them cholera, an infection to the small intestine which devastated the Native Americans during the Black Hawk War. The fort was abandoned for the final time in 1836 as a result of the ending of the Black Hawk War. On January 15, 1831, via an act of the Illinois State Legislature, Cook County was established as the 54th county in Illinois. The unincorporated Fort Dearborn settlement at the mouth of the Chicago River was the county's new seat. Cook County elected its first officials on May 7, 1831. Young, ambitious, and moving from New York to Chicago, William B. Ogden saw the potential in the city despite the muddy land. Elected as the first mayor in 1835, Ogden became an icon for Western development and land purchase. Those who came to the city lusting to follow in Ogden's footsteps brought diversity and life from all over the world and the country that would help shape Chicago's diverse economy and culture. In 1825, the Erie Canal connected New York to Buffalo and the Great Lakes by the Hudson River. Now, with the addition of the upcoming Illinois and Michigan Canal, an east-west trading route was established, but it needed a port. Chicago was perfect, with the river connecting it to Lake Michigan. It would let people avoid the dangers of an ocean route and the tension that slavery created in the South. It was believed that the canal would prove to be very useful during times of war. Shortly after the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825, the idea of connecting Lake Michigan to the Mississippi River via canal came up in order to allow easier trade and safer passage from the East Coast to the South. Also, being able to connect Illinois and Michigan would be a way to make sure that Chicago was known by people from all over. The canal itself would span from Lake Michigan through areas such as Lamont, Lockport, and Ottawa until it reached the Mississippi River. The building of the canal would make westward expansion and trade significantly easier.